a few minutes ago expressed confidence that we all know the story of the book of Esther, and I agree. I mean, I imagine that is true of pretty much everybody here, but I'm going to give you the quick context anyway for the internet, let's say, or anybody who may not be familiar with this story. Quickly, what happens is the book of Esther is the latest in chronological time, the latest historical book. It was written in the days not even of Babylon, but of Medo-Persia, like Ezra and Nehemiah also. And Esther is living with a relative of hers named Mordecai, and they are not in Jerusalem. They're living in a province of the Medo-Persian Empire, and they're just citizens. They're with everybody else. There's a beauty contest of sorts to replace the queen who fell out of favor with the king, and Esther enters this contest and she wins, the prize of which is to be the new queen, and not just a concubine or a woman of favor but not quite. No. Esther was the queen. She was at the top. And while that's going on, her relative, Mordecai, becomes kind of prominent in a certain way. In other words, he gains the favor of the king and the people. And there's this bad guy, this villain named Haman. Usually we call him Haman. That is not at all how his name would have been pronounced. All those many years ago. I think Haman is much more accurate. But this guy has an irrational hatred against Jews. And this guy Mordecai gets under his skin, and he wants to just lash out and destroy Mordecai, but because of Mordecai's position of relative favor, he's not able to, so this larger plot is hatched. If I can't get Mordecai, I'll get all of Mordecai's people. And that is where we picked up the story in the scripture the scripture passage that we read. For the greater context, I'm going to reread the passage, and I'll read down to verse 15, because I want you to pay attention not only to the plot itself, but to how the king responds to the idea and what the immediate fallout is beyond that. So starting in verse 8. Then Haman said to King Ahasuerus, there's a whole bunch of different pronunciations of that word too, but King Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of your kingdom. Their laws are different from all other peoples, and they do not keep the king's laws. Therefore it is not fitting for the king to let them remain. If it pleases the king, let a decree be written that they be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver into the hands of those who do the work to bring it into the king's treasuries. So the king took his signet ring from his hand and gave it to Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, the enemy of the Jews. So the king said to Haman, the money and the people are given to you to do with them as seems good to you. Then the king's scribes were called on the 13th day of the first month, and a decree was written according to all that Haman commanded, to the king's satraps, to the governors who were over each province, to the officials of all people, to every province according to its script, and to every people in their language. In the name of King Ahasuerus, it was written and sealed with the king's signet ring. And the letters were sent by couriers into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and to annihilate all the Jews. Because, just one of those three things isn't good enough. You got to do all three. And we're going to do this to all of the Jews, both young and old, little children and women, in one day, on the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, and to plunder their possessions. So you not only have to kill them, you have to steal from their dead corpses as well. A copy of the document was to be issued as law in every province, being published for all people, that they should be ready for that day. So the couriers went out, Hastened by the king's command, go get this done fast, he says. Hastened by the king's command, and the decree was proclaimed in Shushan the citadel. So the king and Haman sat down to drink, but the city of Shushan was perplexed. I read all the way down to 15 because I love that little detail at the end. After they have successfully promulgated all of their evil to every known corner of the world, how do they celebrate? Let's forget about life for a while. Evil is as evil does, doesn't it? All right, so we have just read that at this point in history, in that area of the world, the government made an edict to kill and destroy and annihilate and plunder, right? But this is a violent edict. We're probably not used to that kind of thing in the land of the free and the home of the brave, although our history does have moments like that in it. But generally, you know, from our kind of Western modern point of view, we look at this and we say, like, how barbaric. Such a thing would never happen. And it's that very mentality that always caused me some trouble as I tried to understand the story of the book of Esther. As I read through this edict and, you know, how the people react, not just the Jews, but people all through the nation, the empire there, and I always wondered, why would anybody obey this? Why is this even such a big deal? It's not enforceable. The king is not going to come to my house and require me with a knife to my throat to go murder my Jewish neighbor. It's not enforceable. Certainly not to every person everywhere. And who cares what the king says? I like my neighbor. He's a good guy. And so I never was really fully able to connect with this story for that reason. Even though I understood the story, I know all the moral points, the moral lessons to get out of it, but just that kind of basic point of logic. Why would people do this? And as I mentioned in Sabbath school, I have trouble killing a spider. I'm not going to go next door and kill a human, you know? Why would people do this? And the reason that this is the subject for today's message is because I get it now. I understand. And we are here to talk about this new level of understanding that I have gained. But first we have to talk about the government, because the government is the actual problem in the story. Without Haman going to the king with this idea, the king would have never issued the proclamation, and without the government's interference, the people do not get it in their minds to go murder their neighbors. So what is the government's role if it is not to tell me to murder my neighbor? And I do mean the Medo-Persian government, but mostly I just mean all governments. What do they all have in common? The government's role over a given people is to outline acceptable behaviors for the people. And the flip side of that is to outline the consequences for unacceptable behaviors. And so when we set up the rules, the boundaries around proper and acceptable behavior, then the people know how to behave in such a way where they get to live until the next day and enjoy their freedom in life and not receive the wrath of the king or the police or whatever, right? And so this system works well when it works well. If I live in a society where the expectation is that we are not to walk around murdering each other, and we are not to walk around stealing from each other, and in fact, even touching you without your consent can be considered assault, and I will be brought up on criminal charges, well, that puts a lot of restrictions on how much evil I can express with impunity, doesn't it? I can't do those things unless I am prepared to meet the wrath of the law. And when the laws are good, when those things the government says are good, this system works great. But when the government speaks evil, you'd get a different outcome. And this is the problem. The government in Persia spoke evil. And then all of the people just like followed along after it. And that's where I always was confused. Why? If you know it's evil, if it's clearly evil, why do you do it? And what finally dawned on me on Wednesday is that the real problem isn't the government, is it? The problem is not the goodness or the evil which the government speaks. The problem is the evil in your heart. Because let's say I don't have such a good relationship with my neighbor. In fact, I actually kind of hate the guy. He makes smelly food. It wafts over into my house. I got to smell his stuff all the time. His lawn is overgrown and he's got parties all the time. There's trash everywhere and his kids are staying up till 11, 12 o'clock with their loud music. And I just hate that guy. Okay. What do I do about it? Well, if the laws around me say, do not murder, do not assault, do not steal, then probably what I'm going to do is grumble and mumble and move on with life, because there's a boundary around me. I cannot express the evil that's in my heart without consequence. But now watch, right? Still got that same evil in my heart, but the government changes its tune and now says, hey, by the way, at this day in the future, not only are you allowed to go murder your neighbor, but it's law that you must. Now what's restraining my evil anymore? Nothing. You see? The problem is not the government. The government is just a tool. The problem is the evil of the heart. And so clearly, in the context of the story of Esther, these people had evil in their hearts. It did not take anything except a few words written down on paper for them to go from not murdering their neighbors to full on expecting to murder their neighbors with joy. That didn't come because the king said so. Because principled people act with integrity in the face of evil. If you are choosing to act evilly because the government says so, that's because you already wanted to act evilly in your heart. So why did Haman hatch this plot in the first place? It's because he had evil in his heart. Why did the king agree to this plot from Haman? It's because he had evil in his heart. And maybe it wasn't the same kind of evil. Maybe he's not walking around hating on the Jews openly like Haman was. But something about the condition of his heart was such that all it took was one guy to say, hey, all of these people, indiscriminately without exception, are a threat to you. Why don't you wipe them off the map? And the king was like, hey, man, that's a great idea. There's clearly evil in his heart. And down on the person-to-person level, the evil is pernicious. It's hidden almost. Because, maybe I don't really want to go next door and murder my neighbor. But if I don't, and everyone else in my community does, I'm the outcast. And there's a whole extra dimension of peer pressure. You know that evil loves to be surrounded by evil, right? Why? What happens to darkness when you introduce light into it? The darkness disappears, right? So darkness has to be surrounded by darkness in order to survive. It cannot coexist with light. So yeah, maybe I think the king is full of it. Maybe I don't want to go next door. Maybe I think this whole thing's a bad idea. But when I am the only one in a community that feels that way, there's a lot of pressure on me to conform. And so I can be influenced by the evil in somebody else's heart as well. Why would the people of Persia obey this horrific decree? It's simply because of evil in their hearts. There was darkness in that society. There was darkness in their hearts. Well, we look around our world today, right now, 2022. You've noticed that the world is pretty chaotic? I almost don't even want to say that, because as Seventh-day Adventists, we've been saying that for 170 years. And it makes it sound like it's the same level of chaotic for 170 years. But you realize it's not, right? That we're in like a special moment of time. Are you paying attention to what's happening in Canada? No? No. Canada is grinding to a halt. For 2 to almost 3 weeks now, a huge convoy of truckers have ceased delivering their goods and instead are parking in Canada's capital of Ottawa. And they're not moving until all this COVID nonsense goes away. I do not want to have to show my papers to deliver my goods to the Americans. I don't want to do this anymore, and I'm not going to do this anymore, and I'm going to sit right here until you change the law. It's not even a law, until you change the mandate. So that's happening, but that's been happening for a few weeks. Are you aware of what's happening right now as of yesterday? See, if I had more time to put this all together, I would have brought pictures, but I didn't bring pictures. They're trampling these protesters with horses. There's pictures and video, because it's not even just the truckers anymore. Now the everyday people who are also sick and tired of this nonsense are showing up to deliver gas and food and money to keep this going, to stand there with their own signs and protest. So how are the police responding? They're getting on their horses and mowing these people down and trampling them with horses. Is that evil? And that's not the same kind of level of evil that we've been living with for a century and a half. That is new kind of evil. The people say, hey, why don't you just leave us alone? And the government says, no, how about I trample you to death with a horse instead? That's evil. And we are living, even here in the United States of America, with a growing sense of evil. People tried to support the Canadian truckers through crowdfunding sources like GoFundMe, and there was another one, Click Send Go, I think. And the Canadian government and the American government both shut them down. Not directly with the force of law, but through this pressure. And so literally millions of dollars were interrupted. They even threatened to confiscate them, but there was such an outcry against that they just refunded all the money to the donors. And so the people who wanted to send money said, all right, that didn't work. How do we send money anyway? And they said, all right, how about I send them some Bitcoin and other cryptocurrencies which are not controlled by the government, right? You just take the government out of the situation, send digital money that way. So have you noticed what our government has done in response to that? Suddenly there's now a cryptocurrency unit of the FBI. You think they're not coming to crack down on this too? We are living in a time of not just evil, static evil. We're living in a time of rapidly increasing evil. Right now. And I hope you understand why, I wanted to say, hey, God, I already wrote my sermon for this week. But I just couldn't. This is happening right now. We're living in a time of lawlessness, and it's going to get worse. Here in California, we are still subjecting our kids to masks in their schools. We're one of the only places in the United States and one of the only places in the world that still requires that. Down in Los Angeles, the largest city in our state, they've had enough of this. There's a whole group called LA Uprising, and they are planning all sorts of things to make this end. I wonder if their local municipal government or our state government or the federal government will deal with them differently than the Canadian government is dealing with them up there. It's to be seen. But we are so reluctant to let go of these restrictions because, again, by the way, darkness can't coexist with light. So if your point of view can only exist if everybody else agrees with it, chances are you're operating from a position of darkness. Because as soon as a different opinion shows up, that can't exist with you, and so you move to shut it down and censor it and kill it because it threatens your point of view. And so we collectively are so married to these restrictions. We're putting kids outside in the cold because we can't let them into the classroom, and etc. We're living in a time of lawlessness, and it's going to get worse. And I just want to tie it in to a message from a few months ago and remind you, we are inside of a Sabbath year right now that began last September and will conclude this coming September. And we have a history since 2001 mirrored by a prophecy from Ellen White written in 1905 that has shown us that at the end of every Sabbath year for 20 years now, there has been a major event. And so I'm not a prophet, and I'm not going to tell you that this is gospel truth, but I personally am fully expecting a major kind of cataclysm this coming September. And when I look around and I see all this chaos, which is not just static, but it's rising, and the next thing in Ellen White's prophecy was the world is stirred by the spirit of war, all this speaks very, very loudly to me. We are coming to the days, I don't think we're there yet, but we are coming to the days of Revelation chapter 13, where there will be a government, probably a conglomerate government, which seeks to have control over every aspect of your life and point you with every cell of your body to the devil. And that means the laws of the land will be demonic laws. And what are we going to do about it? Kind of the main thesis of the message today is that the problem is not really the government, although the government has a lot of power and can push a people toward good with its words, just as easily as they can push a people toward evil. But again, what the government says just lends authority to whatever is already in your heart. So when the government speaks evil, what will be your response? Will it be evil? Or will it be righteousness? Will it be integrity? How's your heart today, church? Our theology tells us that before Jesus comes, every human being on earth will be divided into one of two camps. For God and against God, right? Seal of God or mark of the beast, and that's it. And you look around and you say, well, that's kind of hard to believe. Life is full of so many gray areas, ambiguity. This guy over here, he's not a Christian, but he's all right. He's not going to go, all these things that we tell ourselves. Does any of that matter? It is written. It's going to be this way. And how is your heart today? We're coming to a day when the prevailing culture of the land will be against us. It will be against righteousness more broadly, but that will coalesce around Sabbath-keeping professed Christians. If we believe what Ellen White says, if we believe our own understanding of Revelation, that is what is coming. And so our job is to make sure that our hearts are in such a condition that we won't hear the government give us permission to be evil and then go and be evil. You see, we have to have a different foundation in our hearts. Not one of evil, but one of righteousness, one of godliness, a foundation of Jesus Christ. And as a friend of mine said the other day, and this is why we picked the closing song we did, he said, everybody's building their foundation on something. It's either Christ the rock or it's sinking sand. One of those will provide the strength that we need to act in righteousness even when the entire world around us is speaking evil. The other will pretty much guarantee that the government speaking evil will just release the evil that's in our own hearts. Where are you today? How's your heart today? And to tie it in as a closing thought, to tie it into the promise I made to you 2 weeks ago, that I wanted to bring a series of messages that try to reconnect us to our stated theological identity and our prophetic identity. You may look at what I'm saying today and say, there's none of our fundamental beliefs are what you're saying, Pastor. But you know what is what I'm saying? Fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment has come. The first angel's message is what I'm talking about today. We need to live lives that glorify God, and you can only do that with a foundation of Jesus Christ. If we want to be those people, the end times Elijah, so to speak, the proclaimers of these messages to prepare the world for the return of Jesus Christ, then the choice we have to make today is to stand on the solid rock of Jesus Christ. And that is, in fact, one of our fundamental doctrines. We need to be so lost in Jesus Christ that the Father's name is what's on our foreheads, that our minds are literally sealed against everything else. Are you ready for that? And that's a sincere question, because there is no one in here who is a brand new Seventh-day Adventist as of today, right? You have been hearing messages like this for a long time, years, decades maybe, and yet, where has been the change? All right, so I'm preaching to me as well here. Every one of us are in the same moment of time. Every one of us has the same conflict in front of us, and every one of us has the same challenge. Let's build the house of our lives on the solid rock of Jesus Christ, because the days are coming when the entire world will be sinking sand. And the solid rock is the only place to be, the only safe place to be. You and I know it's already the only safe place to be, but the days are coming where that won't even be ambiguous anymore. Let's be on the solid rock of Jesus. Amen? Are you prepared to do that? Show the Lord. Amen.